Since we've last reported on Syria, violence continues to sweep across the country as Christians and the Druze people are being targeted and killed in the streets by the al-Qaeda government. Those tracking the conflict have pointed out the deafening silence when it comes to the genocide of Christians and the Druze in Syria, especially from those who loudly advocated for stopping the genocide in Gaza. Pro-Israel critics have, on the other hand, pointed out the hypocrisy of Amal Clooney, George Clooney's wife, who has been very vocal about this issue. She has close ties with the Druze community, and she's been very outspoken on the issue in Gaza. Clooney has not said a word about the genocide and massacre of the Druze community in Syria. Axios is reporting that sources inside the White House view Israel's decision to attack Syria this last week as a dangerous undermining of President Trump and his work to bring peace and stability to the Middle East. They see Israel's initial attack on Syria as Netanyahu putting his political agenda first and succumbing to pressure from Druze influence in Israel. And as we mentioned last week, the vicious cycle of ceasefire negotiations, ceasefire agreement, ceasefire violation continues. Frustrations are being aired from the White House. As it stands right now, there is calm in Sweden, Syria, but will it last? To answer this question, it would have very dire effects, one way or the other, in the region, and in turn on America's foreign policy directives there. In a recent op-ed, Syrian-American and former congressional candidate, U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander and Middle East national security expert Dr. Zuhdi Jasser writes, "My heart aches for what has become of my ancestral homeland. As a physician, I cannot detach myself from the human suffering behind each headline. And as someone who has spent decades warning of the rising threat of Islamism, I am sounding the alarm. A new tyranny is taking root in Syria, cloaked in religious language, but every bit as dangerous and destructive as the last." We bring in Dr. Jasser right now to lay out more of his op-ed. Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
What can we expect this time around? This is a very difficult topic, a very difficult country, a very difficult political situation, and it's very unclear where everyone stands and what the motivations seem to be at this moment. Where do you see things at right now?
Well, I have to tell you, we can't take this simply as a snapshot. We always need to keep things in perspective as to what got us here. And it was 55 plus years of Assad's tyranny, of a military regime that divided the country into sectarian divisions and used sectarian violence to legitimize military authority and authoritarian oppression and chemical weapons and other things for 55 years. And thanks to what Israel did in November, it locked out Russian influence, locked out Iranian Hezbollah and others in order for its own security, but also then was the straw that broke the camel's back, if you will, that ultimately ended the Assad regime. But now they're left with this vacuum. And I have to tell you, I served on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom for 4 years, from 2012 to 16. We met with the Muslim Brotherhood after the revolution in Egypt and tried to, impress on them the importance to protect the Coptic Christians and others. And we saw one extreme of the Mubarak regime. Too. Exactly. One extreme of the Mubarak regime exchanged for the Islamist radicalism of political Islam and an Islamic theocracy of the Brotherhood. And because the Obama administration cozied up to the Muslim Brotherhood and claimed they were democratic, it basically set the ground for now the al-Sisi regime to come back and really no change. So if we're going to end the 20th century Game of Thrones, we have to be upfront in these early inflection points and protect the Druze and Christians and not criticize Israel as Ambassador Barak is doing. I mean, he should really be fired as the envoy to Syria and the ambassador to Turkey for taking the side of Erdogan and Qatar and the Islamists. And really, we need to back the minorities and hold Damascus accountable today, not tomorrow, but today.
There was some optimism, and it appears misplaced optimism, that after President Trump met with the current president of Syria, there was going to be some kind of renewed relationship where Syria could start seeing a more commercialized aspect to their positioning in the Middle East. And the idea being that, well, if they start becoming integrated economically, perhaps some of this some of this radicalism will be managed by leadership there. Was that misplaced? Was that too early?
Well, I think as a long-term goal, it's not misplaced. But who is at the front? Who is in the interim government? Is Jolani, who changed his name to Ahmed Shara'a, and who was on the FBI's most wanted list with his work with Islamist radical groups from ISIS to Nusra Front to HTS and others from 2013 to 2024. So just as Hamas was democratically elected and was yet still listed as a terror group, we should be eyes wide open to say, okay, Syria on the ground has the potential of being one of the most successful countries in evolution out of dictatorship. Why? Because it has so many minorities, a Kurdish minority that's not radicalized, a Christian minority, a Alawite minority, and Sunnis that really don't want this type of Islamist regime.
One of the things I thought would happen is as Syria seemed willing to cozy up to the Western world, to cozy up to the rest of the world beyond their radicalism, it seemed like that was a move against Russia, their long-standing relationship with Russia. Where do you think that relationship stands at this exact moment, Russia and Syria's?
Yeah, I think if you look at the inflection point in November, when Israel is still fighting a war on 8 fronts, because of the imminent and primary threat of Iran, it had to begin the process of neutralizing Iran's impact from Lebanon through Hezbollah and through Syria. So it shut that down for its own protection. And thus, Russia then made a calculation, part of which it was because it was stretched thin in Ukraine, to say, you know what, they abandoned Assad, invited him into the hotel in Moscow, and said, you know, we're done with. And the only reason they've had Syria as a client state for so long is because of their base in Tartus, their only base in the Mediterranean. They basically signed that off.
Yes.
And the Islamists in Damascus now have shifted over to the other axis of anti-Westernism, which is Erdogan in Turkey, Qatar, and the Islamists of the Muslim Brotherhood, sort of Sunni Islamist crescent that's anti-Western. So, you know, there's a new axis power. It's no longer the Shia axis of Iran in Syria, but rather the Qatari Turkish axis that is not pro-Western and not pro-Israel.
Well, if you're giving advice to the Trump State Department at this moment, given what we have gone through, what we have seen, the conversations that have taken place, what is your advice now in this region? Do we see a reasonable relationship with Qatar, Syria coming to fruition, or is there just no way at this moment?
I think in the short term, President Trump should use the bully pulpit of the White House to stand with the Druze, stand with the Christian minority communities and others. The Kurds are real allies there. And then hold Damascus accountable and have a trajectory to where we will reject that the Islamists are not Democrats, small d. They don't believe in religious freedom. Hold them accountable to that first liberty, which, as we know as Americans, where religious freedom flourishes, democracy will flourish. Where it dies, democracy dies. So ultimately, we hold them accountable and don't make the mistakes that the Obama administration made. And it seems that Ambassador Barack is beginning to make the same mistakes that Obama made in 2013, which was to recognize the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt and thus usher in an era for another Game of Thrones, which I think President Trump has really rejected in his move for hopefully Abraham Accords 2.0. As we bring in true allies like Saudi Arabia and others, we'll begin to work with those on the ground in Syria that truly believe in Western values and declare political Islam and that red-green axis as the enemies that they are of freedom and religious liberty.
It looks like those alliances with Saudi Arabia in particular are strengthening with a very interesting train effect to places like Qatar and Syria, but we shall see. Dr. Jasser, a pleasure to have you on the program and to lay all that out. Thank you very much for making the time.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.
Coming up, Maha is outraged as the FDA seems to have slipped one past Secretary Kennedy while he was on vacation. Those allegedly responsible have since left HHS. Dr. Robert Malone, who's on the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices at CDC, joins us to shed some light on the situation. We'll be right back.